A lot of the other Iranian movies are produced by the Revolutionary Guard. Or on the other side, you have Hollywood Hitjobs, you have Argos.
You're listening to Cinema Rex, an Iranian film podcast. Episode 20, a Hollywood Hitjobs special, Brian Gilbert's Not Without My Daughter. Oh, speaking of that up, try not to use the F word too much.
Okay.
I'm swearing this podcast.
Okay.
You're going to have to beep it out.
I hate you. It's just going to make so much work for me.
Officially, this is the intro, by the way. We're starting with this. This is the podcast.
Oh my God. Hi, Kaveh.
Hi, we have to swear. We can't not swear.
Well, you can not swear.
Why? You're not triggered enough?
I was quite triggered.
Good, me too.
Yeah,
But you'd seen this film before, right?
I think so. As a kid, I can't. This is one of those things that like the movie ended up contributing so many running jokes and inside jokes in my family that I can't remember if I've seen the movie and it led to me contributing to these inside jokes, or if just growing up around these jokes, I ended up picking them up. Because the movie came out before I was born.
Durud bar shoma dostan aziz. This is the Cinema Rex podcast where we cover all things Iranian film, arts, television, music, culture, anything I'm forgetting, Farhan?
Patio furniture.
I am Kaveh Mohebi.
And I'm Farhan Moradi.
Well, let's dive into it with our guest. As usual with a Hollywood hit job, we will always have a comedian on board with us to help tear apart a film that we think is insulting to our culture. And today we are joined by none other than Sima Sepehri. Sima is an actor and comedian from Toronto, but based in New York City. And fun fact about Sima, she hates bios. Welcome to the show, Sima.
Hi, thank you for having me. I know, I was like, why this movie? And I was like, oh, they want me to roast the hell out of it. Which you chose the right person. I'm triggered. I'm
good.
Triggered.
All across the board, all three of us can say, yes, officially triggered. Because, yeah, we normally do more serious, dramatic, artful Iranian films, but every 10 we pick one that is done not by Iranians that totally shit on our culture. And for episode 10, we did Prince of Persia, the Jake Gyllenhaal film.
Oh, God.
Yeah. We had Agha Navid Agha on for that one.
Nice.
Yeah. And
Nice.
like future episodes will be like Argo and
Yeah.
House of Sand and Fog
Yeah.
and a few other.
Yeah.
Just like
300.
300 will be another one. Yeah.
300.
But what's the stand-up comedy scene for you like in New York and how does it differ from Toronto?
It's amazing. I feel like New York is sort of, I don't know, everyone kind of says it's the mecca of stand-up comedy in North America. And you really do feel that. And I've spent time in LA doing comedy as well. And it's just so different. In Toronto, it's smaller. It's just smaller. You know,
Yeah,
I feel like Toronto as a city is comparable to Brooklyn as a borough. Like, so like all of Toronto is like all of Brooklyn. Whereas like here you have Brooklyn, you have Manhattan, you have Queens, you have Bronx, and there's so many different comedy scenes. You could do comedy in all of those boroughs.
Staten Island.
Yeah.
Shout out to the island of Shaolin.
Right. Haven't been out there yet. Yeah, so there's just more opportunity. With that being said, it's like you're seeing some of the best comedians you've ever seen.
Yeah.
And then you're seeing a lot of shit as well. So it's just a numbers thing.
Is one borough more active in the comedy scene than another?
I would say that Manhattan has all the clubs, and then Brooklyn has, I'm kind of like going between Manhattan and Brooklyn right now. I've done some shows in Queens. I really like Queens. The vibe of Queens reminds me of like the Danforth.
Oh, yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. And the people there, they're a lot like nicer. Manhattan, you don't know what the audiences are going to be like because you get so many tourists. And then Brooklyn, you get a lot of like liberal white people who are like, oh my God, can we laugh at this? Are we allowed to laugh at this? So it's interesting to figure out who you are in these different spaces, because sometimes the comedy that I do in Toronto, it doesn't necessarily hit. Like, for instance, there's not that many Persian people here.
In Toronto?
No, New
in
York.
New York.
Oh, in New York. Oh, right. Yeah.
So when I do my Persian jokes, people are like unfamiliar with the culture. Whereas if you're doing Persian jokes in Toronto or Los Angeles, everyone's like, yeah, we know those douchebags.
Right. Yeah. Well, speaking of being unfamiliar with the culture, today we're going to talk about Not Without My Daughter, which is a film from 1991.
Yeah.
It's an excellent segue.
In 1984, Betty Mahmoudi's husband took her and her daughter to Iran to meet his family.
It's all changed.
He swore they would be safe.
I know
it's a different culture. I just don't understand it.
He swore they would be happy. He swore they'd be coming home soon.
Sweetheart, you haven't packed anything. You want me to do it for you?
No. He lied.
I don't know how to say this to you. We're not going back. We're staying here. I want us to live in Iran.
Not Without My Daughter. Betty Mahmoudi, played by Sally Field, is an American woman married to Moody, played by Alfred Molina, an Iranian-American living in the U.S. When Moody informs her that he wants her and their daughter, Mahtab, played by Sheila Rosenthal, to visit Iran with him.
I believe they're going to a land called Iran.
Iran.
Continue.
Betty is reluctant because of the country's harsh treatment of women. When the family arrives in Iran, Betty discovers that her husband plans to stay in the country for good and has no intention of letting her or Mahtab return to the United States. From there continues a spy-like thriller as Betty tries to free herself and her daughter from the prison that is the Islamic Empire of Iran. It has a Rotten Tomato score of 53% and an audience score of 71%. So Sima, I ask you, what did you think of Not Without My Daughter?
First of all, I was anxious the entire time. I think it was just like everything that happened in that movie made me feel so uncomfortable for two reasons. One, they're portraying the regime in a light that is probably true to some extent. You know what I mean? Like the regime there sucks, but this idea that, you know, this guy left Iran because he hated the Shah and then like went back when the Islamic Revolution happened because his family was so Muslim, like, and he really believes in, you know, after he married an American woman.
Yeah.
All of that, the whole timing, and it is based on a true story. So it's kind of, I don't ever want to question a woman's tale of abuse. Like if she's telling her story, let her tell her story. My problem is with Hollywood and the timing of all this. It seems very suspicious.
Yeah.
It seems like a propaganda film to paint Iran in a terrible light because how many abuse stories of women are there around the world that are being told, then they don't get the same publicity. They don't get Hollywood feature films with Oscar winner Sally Field. Like, and also it's coming on the tail end of the Iran-Iraq war.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which America funded both sides and 500,000 people died on both sides.
Yeah.
So it feels a little bit suspicious. So yeah, the whole time I'm watching it, I'm like, oh my God, they're painting our people as literal. What did she kept saying a word? Oh, primitive.
Yeah.
Yes.
Primitive backwards people.
Yeah.
Primitive backwards country.
Yeah, that really enraged me because first of all, our history is so deep and it's so rich and there's so many inventions. I don't know. I hated the movie. I was anxious the whole time.
To your point on being anxious the whole time, I think this is the first time that I've watched a movie and just been looking forward to the ending. And what I mean by that is there's times where I've seen bad movies and as I'm watching them, I'm like, oh, I'd rather be doing something else. But I don't know if I've ever been like, please just end it, end it, end it. Like, I can't take any more of this. This is the first time I think I've ever experienced that watching a movie. And there's movies out there that I really hate. And I think part of that comes to the fact that it's like, look, I'm not questioning the things that happened to her. I'm questioning the cultural components of this that I know to be wrong, and those are clearly embellished. Those are the things that are infuriating.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And then it puts you in this sort of pigeonhole where, you know, it's like, how can we critique this film that's based on a true story of this woman's abusive relationship correctly while also defending our culture?
Yeah, absolutely. And when you're writing, so this was a book first, and when you're writing a book, the publishers and the editors are going to edit notes and suggestions and changes. Like when you're escaping a country, you're not getting hit with every single one of these obstacles, for example, that you're going to get hit in a movie, right? Because you need a climax. You can't just be like, oh, then we went to the like safe house and then we drove across the border. Or like, oh, then we went to a safe house and we like snuck across the border and it was like 10 scary nights, but like we got over or whatever. You need to be like, then there was a checkpoint, then this happened, and then there was this, and then an alien coyote swooped down from the sky and shot at us with a space laser. Or whatever. Like you need to fabricate more conflict in a movie and in a book, right? And then you're adapting that book to film, and then there you have, again, a scriptwriter and you have producers and the director who are all making their own suggestions for things, right? There's a scene in the movie where when they first arrive to Iran, first of all, everything is just dirty. There's like dirt on everything. There's like dust thrown around on everything. There's dirt thrown around on everything.
The shower that she took and like the way the paint was chipping off the walls, I'm like, okay, like this is excessive.
Yeah.
And by the way, it was filmed in Israel, so
Yes, yeah, it was filmed in Israel.
not Tehran. So just
Yeah, filmed in Israel. 90% of the cast and crew are Israeli, and their lines are just dubbed with ADR. And it doesn't sound good. Like, even just on a technical level, it sounds like, oh, this is now someone in a recording studio somewhere. And so she gets to the airport, and all of a sudden, there's just like there's this like constant drone of, I don't know if for our listeners who are not Iranian, you might have seen videos from Iranian weddings where people will sometimes go, at like something funny or cool or loving that happens, right? But usually that's like at a wedding, it's like 5 seconds and you move on. But this is like she gets off the plane and it's just like a drone of it, and it doesn't even sound like the way that we do it. It's this weird guttural noise. But that just plays through, and she like gets to the house and it's like still playing in the background. Then as they're getting out of the taxi, there's a goat that's just like, its throat is slit right there on the road and there's blood everywhere. And I'm like, what is this movie?
There's an important distinction to make when talking about this movie. And we haven't really touched on that part yet, but there's no there's the real life versions of the event. Like you said, Sima, but like the real Betty has every right to tell her story and not to take away from hers. And I will get to some of those details when I tell you the behind the scenes stuff I researched, but you're totally right about the Hollywood aspect of they were like vultures feasting on an opportunity to shit on Iranian culture as much as they can.
Yeah.
So taking the context of what really might have happened aside, it is scene for scene made. It's like it's a subject of its time too, because in 1991 they're like, we'll put one nice Iranian character and that will balance out the 2-hour runtime of complete offensive shitting on Iranians, and it's completely biased. To the point where I think modern critics, if this movie came out now, would be called out on Twitter right away. The fact that we haven't even talked about Alfred Molina's Farsi in this.
Or anybody's Farsi, for that matter. There's like 3 people whose Farsi is like proper.
I was going to say, the first time you see him talking, he's on the phone and his back is to the camera. And it's so bad that I was like, why didn't they just ADR all of his Farsi with an Iranian speaker? Like, they were like, literally, they must have given him the Finglish, like, Salam would be SALAM.
Yeah.
And he was reading it phonetically and doing such a bad job.
Such a bad job.
I'm sure there was other ways. That goes to the level of care they'd put. They did not give a shit about Iranian audiences seeing this movie. They really did not want that. They didn't want that opinion. They didn't want that perspective. They didn't want that POV of an Iranian involved in this movie to hear their take on the culture and the beautiful side of Iran as a country and its people.
And this is why it feels like propaganda, because like you were saying from the beginning, from the very first scene where you are introducing his family in Iran, it's just terrible character after terrible character.
Mm-hmm.
Like his sister, the way she is to Betty, his brothers or the rest of the family. They're just so, it's like they're a mob. You know, they're there to greet them. And I'm sure that's not how it went down. And I'm sure it was celebratory. I'm sure when she first got there, it was warm, it was kind, but they started off at 100 and did not leave there. And it's even from a storytelling perspective, it's hard to buy. You know what I mean?
Well, especially because like when you're at 100 and then your character comes back to in very, very few select moments when they are nice, like Alfred Molina and his sister, who I just want to point out, his sister is called Maman Bozorg, which means grandma.
Yeah, I couldn't even tell what word he was saying. I couldn't. Did he say Amme? But did he say Amme Bozorg or Mama Bozorg?
Was it?
I heard Amme.
But its accent is so bad that I rewound it a few times because I was like,
maybe it's like Amma Bozorg, maybe?
He said Amma Bozorg. He's just saying it so badly.
I couldn't tell what he was saying. So there's a couple moments where her and Alfred Molina's character Moody will be like nice and then they're angry. And like, even just from the point of characterization, it doesn't make sense how these people are just flip-flopping back and forth between being nice and then all of a sudden like, da, 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 They're just like yelling and like throwing shit.
When I'd heard about this movie for like, it's my first time seeing it. When I'd heard about it for years, I always thought like, oh, he's the villain and he's probably going to be characterized as this like asshole. And when I first saw the opening 10 minutes of the movie, I'm like, oh, he's genuinely written as like a sweet, kind, caring guy. I'm like, what's going to cause this sudden turn? And I don't know what I was expecting, but it's just suddenly being in Iran, it's like a light switch goes off and now he's monster mode. A version of him that apparently hid for 15 years. He never had an ounce of evil in him. And now, like from a writing standpoint, from a script standpoint alone, he makes that turn so hard and so fast that I'm like, this is just bad writing. And also what you were saying, Sima, about them acting like primitive animals when they first arrive at the airport. It's like, wouldn't there be, if you want to do this weird spy thriller way, wouldn't a smarter way to write the script be they first come off incredibly sweet and incredibly normal, and she comes there and she's like, this is so nice. Look how hospitable they are, which is what Iranians are above everything else. They're at least the most hospitable group of people you'll ever meet. They are the best hosts internationally than any other country. And that is from people who've traveled the entire world and also gone to Iran and said, Iran has the greatest hosts in the world. And then you write a character that goes there, goes, look how great they are. Look how well mannered and kind and sweet they are. And then secretly put in the seat. But no, they instantly were like, they're primitive animals, like cavemen charging at them, slaughtering pigs.
And that's established before they even go to Iran. She says, there's a part where Alfred Molina has a conversation with his daughter, Mahtab, where she's like, oh, Lucille says, I hate Americans because you're from Iran. Yeah. And then he says, I'm as American as apple pie. Like, the movie is warning you that these Iranian savages can never truly be American. They can never truly be Canadian, because they're like, look, even this guy who is like as American as apple pie, given the moment for his guard to come down, he'll show you what a savage beast he is deep down.
It's so poorly written. There's literally no nuance to any of the characters. And one of the areas that I thought they could have actually added some context to the film would have been where the teachers, so she's dropping her daughter off, and the teachers, all the women are like, oh, this poor woman, you know, she's stuck here with her husband and his family, and they're being kind and they're being generous. But then when she runs away, she gets beaten by her husband. She comes back. They say, we're going to help you. And she comes back to actually, you know, get help from them. And they're like, no, your husband has to be. Give some fucking context to why they're saying this. These women might not even be Muslim themselves. It might just be the regime. Yeah. Give some context to how varied the religions are in Iran, how people are so different. I personally know very few Muslim Iranians that are practicing. And I know even in Iran, like, people's faiths are so varied. Yeah. Give some fucking context to that. There's a reason why these women can't protect her. It's because they will be executed, you know?
The thing, too, also about the giving context to different types of Iranian people, I can't figure out what Moody is, because he clearly, I don't know what his dogma is or what his religion is, because he clearly came to America and lived for the last 15 years, not a religious man, shows up and
he's drinking whiskey in like one of the first few scenes. And he walks around every goddamn, I almost swore there. He walks around every goddamn house in this movie wearing shoes, which Iranians don't do.
Yeah.
Continue.
He gets there, and maybe there's an element to him trying to put on a face, like maybe he wants his family to think he's more religious than he is, but he adopts that conservative Islamic role so quickly, and it's like he has to get up at 5 a.m. on the first morning he's there to do the morning prayer. And the other thing I wanted to mention really quickly is I'd read in this, I'll get to this in behind the scenes, but there was a creative, deliberate choice to not have any subtitles. So this film, when it came out in theaters, didn't have any subtitles on it. If you don't speak Farsi, you don't ever understand what any other line was said. And that's an interesting choice by the producers to deliberately, like, we never get to hear what that side of the family is saying. Like, we do, because we're speaking Farsi and we can hear some of those like extras and all the whatever speaking Farsi. And at one point they're like, oh, bale, 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 bale. You're kind of saying dumb things like that. But for whatever moments there are when there's someone on the other line or on the phone, we're in the audience, you were never getting subtitles, which is just to further alienate you and make them seem like
savages.
Yeah. To your point about the bala thing, Kaveh, just to clarify for the audience, there's times where a character will say something in a room and then like 20 people in the room just all start repeating that same word. Like one person will go, she'll be like, oh, can I do this? And then one person goes, bale, which means yes. And then all of a sudden, like 20 people all just start going, bale, 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 bale. And there's like, everyone's just repeating it. And you're like, what? What
Why
is
are they
this?
talking this way?
Yeah. And as soon as an argument happens, it's like there's a joke that Iranians make where it's like, oh yeah, when you're at a family gathering, everyone's just yelling and talking over each other. That's highly exaggerated. And that's usually for the sake of comedy. You'll see that in like stand-up or in a skit. But to actually put that in a serious movie where all of a sudden someone gets mad at Sally Field's character, and then you just have like 40 people angrily yelling at each other at the same time, and they're all just like frantically looking at each other and pointing and yelling.
Yeah.
It just it doesn't work, and it makes us look like uncivilized buffoons.
I wanted to point out one thing I saw of graffiti that the camera lingers on, and I just thought it was really funny, giving like 35 years context added to it. There's like these bloody knives of 4 nations written on the bloody knives. Did you remember what the 4 nations were? Did you catch this graffiti? Mm-hmm. 4 knives, bloody knives were Israel, USA, Saudi, and USSR. And I just think like it's so funny, like given 2024 context and those 4 countries being like, well,
yeah,
not wrong. The daughter's 6. Why the fuck is she wearing a hijab outside?
When I was a kid in Iran, I had to wear hijab
At
to like
6?
Yeah. Well, I was 5.
In public? I thought.
Yeah.
But is that okay? That's interesting. I didn't think that you had to until a certain age, like 10 or 12 or something.
No, I think it's 8 or 9, but it's like encouraged as a kid, but at 8 or 9, it's like mandatory.
Right. Okay.
I had to wear it to school.
Oh,
School, yeah. School for sure. School for sure.
Yeah.
yeah. School. Yeah. No, I know the scenes in school she had to, but when they first get there and they're walking the streets, I thought that she looks a little too young to be wearing it.
For younger girls, it's not the hijab under the age of 8 or 9. It's I forget what it's called, but it's like a training hijab.
Right.
It's like a one piece that just sits on your head.
They put a training bra on their head.
But that's also why, like, when she's the kid, there's a couple scenes where she doesn't wear the hijab in the street, so that tracks.
Okay.
But the thing that doesn't make sense is at the beginning, if she is 6, right, and maybe in real life the real lady just didn't know this, but at that age, if she would have separated from her husband, she would have gotten custody of the daughter. She wouldn't have been able to leave the country without the husband's approval, but she could have at the very least separated and gotten custody, because women get custody of the daughter, I think, until like 7 or 8, and then it goes to the man.
One of the things that I was hoping that they would expand on more was he couldn't get a job at a hospital.
Mm-hmm.
And he came home and he was so angry.
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, they need so many doctors here, but they're not hiring me. And then he goes off on a rant about how they're primitive and they're backwards. And his brother was like, why are you speaking like this? This is not true. That's not what happened. And I was like, so what happened?
Yeah.
Why couldn't he get a job?
My understanding of that is like his brother was gaslighting him.
Okay.
Like, you know how like here sometimes like if a person of color doesn't get a job and you feel the vibes off a racist if you're a person of color, they don't need to overtly be like, I don't like you because you're of a lesser race than me. But like you can feel those vibes, and sometimes you'll say it to a white friend and they'll be like, no, that's not what happened. He wasn't racist. You're like, buddy, you have no clue what you're talking about. I think it's a similar situation where Moody felt vibes, and because his brother his brother-in-law is just used to this environment, he's like, no, that's not what happened. Why are you embellishing?
Right, because
that was my reading.
His education was in America, and they're not accepting him there because, see, I think that that's bullshit.
Yeah, I think realistically, they'd be jumping to take him.
Yeah.
Even in that time, right? Like,
yeah.
Well, yeah.
That's I know. It's something about that really struck a chord with me. I'm like, something about this doesn't add up to me.
Yeah.
It's quite simple. The note I had made was maybe he's just a shit doctor because he's not getting a job. He gets fired in America. He's like, I'm too Iranian, so they won't hire me here. Then he goes to Iran. He's like, I'm too American. They won't hire me here. And my note was, this guy's probably just a shit doctor. Like nobody wants to work with him and they're coming up with reasons.
Do we know that he was actually fired? Because I feel like it would have been a lot more interesting if he just said that. And then he like gets a call and Sally Field picks up the phone and they're like, oh, we haven't heard from Moody in a while. Like, what's going on? You know what I mean? Like, that would add another layer.
The book says he was fired. There's no other mention whether or not he was fired.
Okay.
not from any other side of the family.
Okay.
Do you like the part when a woman and a man come running out with AK-47s and they're dressed head to toe in black and they point the AK-47s at Sally Field's face and tell her to cover up the little bit of hair that's showing? Do you remember when two strange people just come rushing out of a car and then the guy goes, "Every hair that is not covered is a dagger in the heart of our martyrs." And that was a family member telling her that. That was the brother.
On the one hand, it's like that's probably the morality police, right?
Yeah.
As we've seen in the last couple of years, like with the woman life freedom movement, you're like, is it that far-fetched? I don't know. As a woman, I'm sort of caught in between this place of like, I hate the way they're portraying this, but also the regime is really, really, really oppressive. So, and yes, they do kill people. They execute people for showing their hair. That's what happened to Masa Amini, you know? So I don't know. I don't know what to say about that.
No, I think there's a distinction to be made about how they actually will treat women who are showing their hair, especially in the 90s, versus how it's depicted for a cinematic scene in a film.
Yeah. Why didn't you just show the realistic version of this? Like, you didn't need to embellish and be like, then they have an AK-47 and this guy has a bazooka or what. Like, you don't have to like up the stakes.
Yeah.
Kaveh, I love when you say putting a hat on a hat. That's exactly what it is. It's like, these are the things that Iranians see this movie, these subtle embellishments that they do throughout the movie, that when it adds up, we're like, what the hell is this? But then other people see this and they're like, no, it's not that far-fetched. It's like basically the same thing, when it's not basically the same thing. These subtle differences add up and it paints a totally different version of things. And I think it spits in the face of the real hardships that women actually have to go through in Iran. One thing I'd love to point out. Okay, also, I took 5 pages of notes on this movie.
Okay.
Wow.
I've never taken so many notes in my life. There's a point earlier on in the movie where Moody's at work and he's reading an Iranian newspaper, which, like, already this guy's very assimilated. He's as American as apple pie, quote unquote. He speaks with a perfect American English accent, and he's reading the like Iranian newspaper completely in Farsi. And there's these racist doctors who are just super insufferable. And look,
playing pool.
Racism is a thing. Yeah, sorry, playing pool. What did I say?
No, I'm just saying they're playing pool like doctors do apparently.
Yeah, they're playing pool in the break room. And like, look, we experience racism. We experience microaggressions. We experience overt things. We overhear conversations. But the dialogue between them was just so over the top. It was so cringy. They're like, they look over at him and they're like, what are those? The Iranian funny pages? It's not even written in real words. And they're just like laughing and making dumb jokes. Then he goes home and he's like crying to his wife and he's like, oh, the other kids at school were making fun of me again or whatever. And it's like, what is this movie?
Yeah.
I wish they would have expanded on his work life a little bit more, because it's sort of, I mean, this movie has zero nuance and zero depth, right? So it's like, even a shitty character like that, where he's an abusive, controlling husband who, is like fundamental with his religious beliefs and all of these things. If you had just given a little bit of nuance and context of like, how did this person get to be where he is? Like, expand a little bit on the experience of, but what they were again, they started off at 100 with the racism, and they didn't even they didn't even expand on it to give us more context. It's like, oh, he's just it like, you're like, are we supposed to feel bad for him, or are they trying to paint the picture of this is how the world views Iran and they're right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, I don't know. It's like, what is the POV here? Like, they tried a little bit to be like, oh, okay, well, he is a good guy. He's going through a really hard time at work. It's hard to assimilate. So he wants to go back to work, back to his home country. But it didn't feel like that at all. Like,
I couldn't tell if I was more insulted as an Iranian or as a screenwriter. Like, which part of me is more offended by this movie? There's also adding to the thing, Farn, you said about when they have the background characters, the women just saying like things like, oh, bale, 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 and they're just having the walla in the background. One of them was when she shows a photo, Sally Field shows a photo of her mother and father in America, And they're like, oh, این یه عکس از مادر و پدرشه. And they're like, everybody goes, چه جالبه, چه جالبه. And like 9 women are like, چه جالبه, خیلی جالبه, جالبه, جالبه. I'm like, what's going on? They're like completely hypnotized or something by a photo of your parents.
It's like a trance, like a cult.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's called like.
This is an excellent time to jump into Kava's opening shot corner. Kava, take it away.
I don't remember what the opening shot was.
I wrote it down. There's like 10 minutes of credits, and then we see. God. Yeah,
I had to fast forward, and it's all Michigan, right? It's like, ooh, this like beautiful Michigan.
It's like 10 minutes of credits, and then it's just B-roll of like
lakes and stuff.
Yeah, lakes and trees. So Kava, what's your takeaway from that?
Well, I don't know. I hadn't thought about it now until Sima says it, but like maybe this idea of like, look how serene and peaceful America is with its ducks on the bay and the lake and the docks, and that's probably it. No, there's nothing I got more from it.
Yeah.
I want to point out that they're from just outside of Lansing, Michigan.
Yeah.
Lansing, Michigan is notoriously racist. Like to the point where there was a group that broke off of the KKK called the Black Legion. And the reason that they broke off from the KKK was because they were deemed too extremist and too radical for the KKK. They had a significant chapter in Lansing, Michigan. So this is this is where Sally Field's character is from.
Yeah.
FYI.
It's interesting, I mean, they're positioning, those scenes of Michigan next to the opening scenes of when they land in Iran, and how vastly different it is. And you're just like, bro, nobody wants to live in Michigan. First of all.
Except for the Black Legion.
First and foremost, no one's, escaping anywhere to live in fucking Michigan. And just the way they're portrayed Iran and the characters, it just felt so unrealistic. And I'm sure that movie at the time had such significant cultural impact.
Yeah.
Mind you, anytime I ask people if they know it, people like younger than me, they don't. So
that's good.
Yeah. I'm surprised at the reception it got, though. Like 71% from an audience rating is still pretty high, and there's a lot of critics that gave it pretty favorable reviews. Yeah, if I take the blinders aside as an Iranian, I still don't think it's a good movie.
2 hours also? I can't.
Yeah, 2 hours is too long. Before we get to
behind the scenes and trivia.
Well, before that, Farhan's final frame. This is what you were talking about with the at the very end, it's like, oh, this is based on a true story. Sally Field's character went on to do this, and that, yada, yada, yada. There's one of the last few words that comes up on the screen is, many women and children are held against their will in foreign countries. Bro, this literally happens in every corner of the goddamn world.
Yeah. Many
this
women and children are held.
That's like, that's only in Iran. Like, women are held captive by their husbands, probably like across the street from your house. This shit happens everywhere. And it's problematic.
A domestic problem.
Yes, and it's problematic. It's a global problem. It's problematic when you come out and you're like, oh, this is only an Iranian thing. And I'm going to throw this to you because I want to hear you take this away. It's a problem when you have white feminism being defended through the use of racism. But go ahead.
Oh my God. Of course. I mean, this is one of the biggest problems with the lack of intersectional feminism in society today. I feel that even when we're talking about diversity and equity, which after 2020, we thought we were going to have some kind of something, but now that's all fallen apart. Like, it's done. They've scrapped it. People hate it, as if this country is not filled with fundamental Christians who don't believe in women's health, women's rights, who are actively rolling back women's rights in America, So and look at the people who voted in someone like Trump. It was the white women that really, really got him in there, because I mean, obviously the right-wing white men, like, that's expected. but to actively say, here, take my rights away as a woman because my husband's POV is much more, but it's like they're willing, you know what I mean? In some countries, you have no choice. It's not a democracy.
Yeah.
But these women are actually willing. And to me, I think it's almost more insidious because there's this with, right-wing white men, or even liberal white men, people who are at the top of the privilege pyramid, which are like white men, cis white men. You're like, at least I know what to expect from you because like it's kind of simple and you're putting it out there. But with the white feminist women, it becomes so insidious because they're on board with everything until their privilege is taken away.
Right. Yeah.
Until they are made to feel uncomfortable.
Totally. Yeah.
And then you see the true color, which is you don't deserve the same rights as me. Why should you have the same privilege as me? You're other. You're from, And so, I mean, I think this is, and then when, of course, it's like I'm sure Sally Fields is a, feminist. I'm sure she's liberal, but also, I'm also sure she's never come back around and say, well, hey, I think the way that we portrayed these people was maybe questionable for its time. We got away with it, but now looking back, I think maybe it was unfair.
Yeah, I was really looking for that sort of thing. I Googled Alfred Molina and Sally Fields, seeing if they ever. I literally typed Alfred Molina apology, not without my daughter, just to see if there was ever any reflection from either of those two actors about being involved in the movie, and I wasn't able to.
They're never going to apologize because they're going to say, "Oh, this is her reality. This is what happened to her. All this stuff."
Yeah.
Because and I should just clarify, we're not shitting on feminism. I would assume all three of us on the podcast today are feminists. We all believe in the equality of men and women.
Absolutely.
The problem with this movie is that it tries to say, oh, this is a movie about empowering women against all odds and how women are subjugated by XYZ. But instead of being like, oh, this is like a systemic global problem, patriarchy is a problem with humanity, they're going, this is a problem with Iran and Iran only. Then they had an opportunity at the end of the movie to be like, oh, this is a problem in Iran, and X amount of women every year go through similar problems in the United States, right? Because now you're drawing a parallel. Even if you still have all these racist things throughout the rest of the movie, you have an opportunity here to go, hey, racist white audience in Lansing, Michigan, you know how you just spent 2 hours looking at how savage all these people are on the other side of the world? Guess what? Half of your neighbors are savage and controlling of their wives too. Because then it's like, it's a way of kind of inceptioning your audience, because it's like we've just conditioned the audience to get angry at the way that Iranians are treating women. You have an opportunity here to go, by the way, your brother, your coworker, your neighbor, whatever, are probably also treating women like garbage. But they don't. It was a missed opportunity.
That's why I say it's suspicious, the timing of it all, because listen, the West has always profited from portraying Muslims, brown people, Iranians, Arabs as the villain, because when you are pretending like you are fighting for freedom or you live in such a free country, which, as we're seeing now with the whole Biden and Trump election coming up, this is not a free country. This is not choice. People don't want this, right? But when you're portraying this like we're free, you have to have an opposition. You have to have some villain that you can sort of be like, ooh, this is the boogeyman. And like, we want to do everything we can so we're not like them. Would you rather would you rather be like them? Would you rather be like this? So that whatever illusion of choice or democracy that they're feeding you here, you're like, whew, well, at least we have freedom of speech. And then you're like, okay, well, do we have freedom of speech? Because there's a lot of people who are pro-Palestinian who have been who have lost jobs, who have been canceled, who've lost their platforms. There's politicians in Canada and in the US who have been censured for speaking out.
Mhm.
So it's like, do we have freedom of speech?
Mm-hmm. It's funny that you say it's suspicious, the timing. I was going to save this for behind the scenes, but maybe we can just move on to it from here. Because I don't even think it's suspicious. In 1991, Alma College gave an honorary doctorate to Betty Mahmoudi, the writer, the woman that went through this and wrote the book, for the writing of her book. And by the dean's own admission, she was awarded the degree because of her book. Because, quote, the attention the book got because of the movie had provoked almost naively or unknowingly a lot of patriotic feelings, because this was the enemy country at the time.
Yeah.
And they awarded her a doctorate, an honorary PhD.
Yeah, of
From that
course.
college, because they're like, whether she knows it or not, her book really helped patriotism in America at a time where it needed it. And it's like, they're not even being suspicious about it. They're just like straight up like, yeah, this was a great time for this movie to come out.
Well, I mean, in capitalism, there is everything is sort of, you're selling something. You're constantly selling something.
Yeah.
There's a reason why, we don't hear about the fundamental Christians who are abusive to their wives, or they are, driving their cars through rallies, or, they get away with walking around with swastikas and yelling Nazi propaganda. There's a reason why that is allowed, and then all the other things are not. It's like, if you're brown, if you're Muslim, if you're Arab or whatever, you will be villainized.
There was one of our friends made a movie called Motherland, and the opening montage of that movie shows all this footage from the 70s and the 80s in the United States, where these like rabid American crowds were just demanding every Iranian be deported to Iran, like all of them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I got a chance to see some of the raw footage, and it's crazy. The like sentiment around these vicious mobs, like they're angry, they're like frothing at the mouth. And this is one of the things that I want to dive into a little bit later, but just a little tee up for that. But when we get to deeper analysis, I want to talk about that. But yeah.
Behind the scenes and trivia. Mostly me telling you stuff I've researched, and jump in if you have any extra stuff that I've missed or any reactions to what I say. I thought I'd add a disclaimer to a lot of what I'm about to say. And that is to say, fuck the real life Mahmoud Mahmoudi and his entire Islamic extremist family, and any member of the intolerant, draconian, misogynistic death cult that he's a part of.
Yep.
And that government. Because a lot of what I'm going to say is going to be sort of sounding like slander towards Betty, and maybe rightfully so, given the cultural context of when this film and this book came out. But I'll start by saying that there's a 2002 documentary called Without My Daughter that Mahmoudi funded and is in it. Like, it's his side of events. I watched the entire thing yesterday in preparation for this, and like nothing made me side more with Betty than hearing his side of the story. Like even his side of the story, I was like, yeah, okay, this makes me totally agree with Betty. And
he's like, but my story, and then it's like, you're terrible.
It's awful. And in the documentary, it's mostly him, people who side with him, including the other white American woman that was there. The real life version of the friend she makes.
God. Yeah.
They're talking about their side. He's like, it wasn't like that at all. I never saw him once lay his hands on her. I'm like, okay. All right, great. So that's just a disclaimer off the top. But yeah, let's go. Okay. A second book. My name is Mahtub. Mahtub wrote a book in 2015 with the tagline, Not Without My Daughter Continues. And I guess it's like a book from her point of view, from how she remembers it as a young girl. And she talks about the main theme being like learning to forgive her father. So she never ended up seeing him again.
Yeah, I think, tell your story. I can't imagine as a young woman how traumatizing that is. Myself as an Iranian woman, seeing, my mom's side of the my mom, her experiences with men, the regime, growing up in Iran, she experienced a lot of hardships. So hearing her tales about it is like, I'm like, yeah, it is common for men in that society to beat their wives, kill their wives sometimes. There's like honor killings and all of these kinds of things. And just this like imminent threat that you could literally die, and I don't know how common it is today. I don't know how prevalent those ideologies are today. All I know is that it has nothing to do with Islam. It has nothing to do with Islam. It's not about, because all the other, so when I talk to my Arab friends about how terrible like the regime is in Iran and the things that I know about the culture and just, living there and whatnot, they're like, they're all like, it's not like that. Like, I'm sure there's parts of it, but they're like, it's not the same. Now, with all that being said, sure, tell your story, but also, is it a bit of a grift? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, with that idea, it was also estimated that the family came out. Betty made it from the sales of her book and her involvement in the film. She came out with a quote, a fortune to last the rest of her life. So they also profited. Great timing to be able to tell that story. And again, not to refute any of it, but it was they ended up making a fortune because in 1991, movies would make a lot more money than they do now. And being a producer and co-writer of that and the book made them very, very rich. So it became like their legacy, like the daughter takes the reins. And now if you see their Wikipedias, they're like, there are novelist writers that did this and this. And it's like all they ever wrote was stuff about this.
It's a situation where, to me, it's like, look, this story deserves to be told, but it should not be at the front of the line. There are so many other stories about Iranians who suffered at the hands of the Islamic Republic and the regime. Like,
yeah, Iranians, exactly.
Iranians. Yeah,
exactly.
That those stories should have been told. Or if you were going to talk about the intersection of the US and Iran, why don't you talk about the Iranian men and women who were students that were in Texas and in Michigan who were chased by angry mobs? They don't want to tell that story because it doesn't feed into their narrative.
Yeah. Alfred Molina revealed in an interview that he was once punched in the face by a man who had seen this movie and assumed that Molina was the real Moody and not just an actor. The real Mahmoudi also wrote a book called Lost Without My Daughter, which refutes a lot of the film. Reacting to the film and Molina's portrayal of him, Moody said, "I asked, is this supposed to be me? As you can see, I am short, bald on top, and I wear glasses. No resemblance at all," which tells a great deal about how realistic this whole movie is.
Wow.
That is the thing that he's focused on, not the fact that he beat his wife, kidnapped his daughter. He's not refuting all these things. He's like, they're like, oh, this tall Iranian man beat his wife and kidnapped his daughter. He's like, wait a second.
Yeah.
I'm not tall.
It's interesting to me that Alfred Molina got punched in the face because someone thought that he was the real character. It kind of reminds me of just plain old racism, who just, I don't know you. I have this idea of you and I'm going to attack you.
Yeah.
I wonder how many actual Iranians got punched in the face because of this movie.
Until his death in 2009, Mahmoudi would host lectures where he would screen the film in front of a large crowd and refute the scenes in an effort to clear his name. He became a bit of a celebrity, and he would hold these really Islamic groups. They showed footage in the documentary at lecture halls, because he was also I guess
in Iran
lecturer.
Or here.
No, in Iran. You'd go and there's footage of him doing this where it's very Islamic crowds, very pro-Islamic government crowds showing this, and they're tearing apart the movie scene by scene. Essentially what we're doing, but different context.
Also, to your point of that thing of him using this in lecture halls, that talks to why this is one of the reasons why this is such a dangerous movie, is when you begin to embellish on these things that don't need embellishment.
Yeah.
The regime will use this as ammunition to criticize women's rights.
Well,
and
America,
women's rights. Yeah, absolutely.
And it's also the call is coming from inside the house, doth protest too much. It's anyone who's defending something so much, you're okay, maybe, it's it's people who are super homophobic. You're okay, maybe you're gay. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Thankfully, this is episode 20 of our podcast. Otherwise, someone just listening to this episode will think that we're ardent supporters of the regime. But it's no, Go listen to the other 19 episodes. We're like shitting on the regime quite a bit.
Farn, this one's a piece of information that's going to be concerning to you. In 2016, journalist Ghazal Imami of Vulture, reflecting on the 25 years since the film's release, concluded that Not Without My Daughter had become known for making American women more apprehensive towards dating or marrying Iranian men.
I'm not surprised.
Based on her research. So, in case, by the way, ladies, Farn single. Anyone out there listening looking to date a handsome Iranian man?
Handsome. I don't know about that.
Sorry, ladies, I'm taken. The co-author of the book, Not Without My Daughter, also wrote the book Midnight Express, which was made also into a movie in 1978, directed by Alan Parker, written by Oliver Stone. It's about a college student who gets arrested in a Turkish prison, an American college student who gets arrested in a Turkish prison for trying to smuggle out hashish out of the country. It was similarly criticized for its unfair and racist depiction of the Turkish. So, like, literally, they got, for this co-author of the original book, someone who had in the past written something that totally demonizes the Turkish people. And they're like, let's get this guy to write this book with you.
These are the things that make you go, it's not about the depiction of the regime, terrible regime, oppressive regime, criminals. It's not about whether or not this woman's been abused, but it's sort of like this white saviorism.
Yes,
that
yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
why does this person get the spotlight to tell their stories when there's truly millions of women that should be telling their story?
And this film does nothing but stoke the hate from both sides, because then you have Americans watching this movie being like, see, this is why we have to intervene in Iran, save these women. And then like an asshole like the real Moody would show this film to like really extreme Islamic citizens and being like, see, this is Zionist propaganda because the Jews who control media, this and this and this. And like both ends of that spectrum, like both of those people who are doing those things, but they're using this film as like to further their cause as to why America is bad. Look at the way they depict us, which to some extent correct. But then the Americans are like, look at their treatment of women and why we need to interview, to a certain extent correct. But you're not doing anything to heal anything or like bridge any gaps.
Yeah.
I mean, as an actor, I am always suspicious when there is, a Western person telling an Iranian story.
Totally. Yeah.
It's never, because it's like, why are you telling this story? Who are you to tell this story? Not aside from this particular story, so many of the auditions that I go on, especially right now, especially in the last like couple of years, anytime there is a narrative of Iranian characters, and it's like they're portraying people from Iran, they're going to Iran, all of these things, I read it and it screams propaganda.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I should even be saying this because it could prevent me from getting jobs in the future, but so much of it is propaganda and propaganda. And you're like, okay, because otherwise I'm not going out for roles that are like the girl next door. It's like, I am battered Iranian woman who's, trying to escape whatever. I'm a hijabi. And I'm like, there are other people who can tell the story. I'm not, I'm a Canadian woman who spent most of my life in the West.
Yeah.
I'm not religious, but okay, yeah, sure. This is the box that you're going to put me in.
I just like the idea of you're playing battered Iranian woman number 4. Like there's probably like 4 or 5 of them in the scene. And you're like, I'm here. I'm Sima Sepehri. I'm here to audition for battered
Sima
Iranian woman 4.
is playing number 1.
Yeah,
she's number right. You're right.
Yes.
You're right.
So it's always interesting, even now, where that's 1991, we're 30, 40 years outside of that, and it's still the same. So to me, I'm like, if there are no Iranian filmmakers behind it, I'm always suspicious.
Yeah, as you should be. One of the last things, and then I just want to ask you about some anachronisms, but this film features 2 Spider-Man alumni. Sally Field played Aunt May in the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man, and of course, Alfred Molina played Doc Ock. And funny enough, in the comics, those 2 get married at one point.
The amount of memes that have come out of screenshots from this movie and like the Spider-Man meme subreddit.
Oh, I
It's
didn't know
amazing.
that.
It's a gold mine. That's the one positive thing that this movie has contributed to society is Spider-Man memes.
Spider-Man memes.
That's so funny.
Critical reactions. Is that cool? Should we
Yeah.
just move forward?
Sure.
Yeah.
I wanted to read a specific Roger Ebert quote of the Chicago Sun. Roger Ebert said, "Here's a perplexing and frustrating film which works with great skill to involve our emotions, while at the same time making moral and racial assertions that are deeply troubling." He stated that it does not play fair with its Muslim characters. If a movie of such a vitriolic and spiteful nature were to be made in America about any other ethnic group, it would be denounced as racist and prejudiced. No attempt is made, deliberately I assume, to explain the Muslim point of view, except in rigid sets of commands and rote statements. No Muslim character is painted in a favorable light. The local people who help the heroine are dissidents or outlaws. We are not even permitted to learn what they say because the film declines to use subtitles to translate the considerable spoken dialogue of the Iranian characters. Yet, I recommend that the film be seen for two reasons. One reason being of the undeniable dramatic strength of its structure and performances. Hard disagree. It is impossible not to identify with this mother and her daughter, and Field is very effective as a brave, resourceful woman who is determined to free herself and her daughter from involuntary captivity. The second reason is harder to explain. I think the movie should be seen because it is an invitation to thought. It can be viewed as simply a one-sided and bitter attack, but it also provides an opportunity for testing our own prejudices, our own sense of fairness. 3 out of 4 stars.
Who said
Which
this?
is such Roger Ebert.
Ebert?
But that is such a strange review because he spends so much time saying the right things about how racist and prejudiced this film is, and then he's
No,
like,
but then
"It's
at
also
the
a pretty
end,
good
he's
movie."
like, "Yeah, you should watch it though." Like
Yeah,
everything
it's
from
very-
then on,
yeah, exactly.
I'm like, what the hell?
So 3 stars from Roger Ebert.
Well, I don't so much of the stuff. Like, I mean, we all know Hollywood is a big grift, right? It's not the most.
Yeah.
It's not the most talented people that get the job. It's not the most. It's like nepotism. It's who you know. So much of
Most
it is
resourceful.
so much of it is PR, and so much of these, like, I'm sure he was paid to say that. I'm sure there are dishonest reviews all the time, but he was
Mhm.
probably so conflicted that he had to put his own opinion in there because he was like,
Mhm.
I know Iranian,
Mhm.
and this is crazy, right? And he's right. Why didn't we get the Muslim perspective? Because that fundamentalism and abuse and oppression and all of that has nothing to do with Islam.
I agree.
Sorry, do you have more?
Yeah, the last thing is Sheila Rosenthal, the young actress, won a Young Artist Award for Best Actress for this film. And Sally Field was nominated for the Golden Raspberry Award for Worst Actress of 1991, where she lost to Sean Young for A Kiss Before Dying.
Nice.
That's the only thing I have for critical reviews.
I'm gonna throw in some user reviews for this
Sure.
because I think with this movie, it's important.
Sure.
One of the top user reviews is from IMDb. I'm sorry that some people feel that a true story is some sort of Iranian bashing. I'm also sorry that so many Middle Eastern countries are so primitive and have little respect for women for their right to equality.
How many stars did they give him?
I think it was like 8 or something. I don't know. I didn't write that down. But these were like positive reviews, and they're like the top reviews on IMDb. You can go look. The next review. I can't understand why this movie was called racist. If you go through the Rotten Tomatoes and IMDb reviews of this movie, it is very disheartening.
Deeper analysis. I want both your thoughts on this. What is the film about? What is the subtext? What are the themes of this movie? What is the digging deeper about this movie from your point?
Subtext.
Yeah.
I feel like this movie is so shallow in depth that there is no subtext. It's like a big, huge advertisement for how terrible the Middle East is, how primitive the Middle East is, how awful the Middle East is, that you almost even get away from talking about domestic violence and how that happens to, like you were saying earlier, how that happens to so many women all around the world. Like in North America alone, I remember reading stats about how insane the numbers were for domestic violence during COVID.
Yeah.
Mm.
And it was happening here and in Canada, but we don't really talk about it because, like, oh, in the West, women are so free, and in the West, Do you know how many women are murdered by their partners? The number one cause of death for pregnant women is their partners. You know, here.
That's
and we
wild.
we don't talk about that. We don't talk about all of these horrific things that are happening to women here because again, we have the boogeyman over there. So would you rather be over there than go back to your country, you know? So I mean, I don't, you know, if we want to talk, it's like, if we want to talk about domestic violence, let's talk about domestic violence. If this is a propaganda film to paint Iran in a terrible light during a time where it's super convenient for the West, that's what it kind of feels like.
Yeah. That's a really good point. That this movie uses domestic violence almost as like padding. You know what I mean? Like it's like oh, when you're writing a script, you're like, oh, at this page, this page, this page, this page, we need little bits of conflict that arises for the character. That's how they're using domestic violence here. This movie is not about domestic violence. It's about how savage and backwards the Iranians are. And then they use domestic violence as a way to like sprinkle it in. Yeah. Where I'm curious if the original book is the other way around. I don't know. I haven't read it. But
it's like a Trojan horse to talk about domestic violence, but really you're talking about the primitive Iranians.
Yeah.
But it's like got the underpinnings of like a wolves in sheep's clothing kind of thing.
Well, this is the big question we have to ask ourselves whenever we're telling a story that about a culture that is not our own. It's why is Hollywood getting involved? Because that's a capitalist move. It's never in good faith. It's always someone's profiting off this, and why are they profiting off? Sure, let's tell the story. But who's telling the story?
Yeah.
Why are they telling the story?
Yeah. I think that's what so many of these user reviewers are missing is they're focusing on the little sparkly distractions that they're using to push ahead the propaganda. They're like, oh, this is a movie about domestic violence. Why are people calling this racist? But it's like, no, man, like this is a movie about culture bashing, and they're using domestic violence as a shield to protect themselves from any criticism.
Couldn't say it better myself.
One other thing that I want to mention just for deeper analysis, this is more of a meta thing that I want to mention, is that this movie is dangerous. To have this movie come out in a society that was already very anti-West Asian, very anti-Iranian, very anti-Arab, and then have this movie come out, I guarantee you that this led to some kind of violence or intimidation, antagonistic behavior, like you said, Kaveh, from that article from 2016, the sentiment of white women towards Iranian men. Like these very real consequences in society came about as a result of this movie, both in the West and in the East, where you look at how the Iranian government and the Iranian regime and these hardliners use this film to be like, oh, look, the West is attacking us. It's all propaganda, all this stuff. It doesn't benefit anybody. The shitty people on both sides of this movie are using it to maintain some kind of status quo and enact either more anti-women bullshit in Iran or racist bullshit here.
Yeah, and the real story, which is domestic violence, is very real across the board in all countries around the world because of the patriarchal nature of our societies. Regardless if you're in the West or the East, it's getting lost in the shuffle. And, you know, women's stories are getting, you know, they're used as a gateway to sort of play this political warfare psychologically between the East and the West.
Best scene.
Kaveh, you go first.
I kind of inverted my best scene and least scene because at that point, once I got really comforted in the fact that I knew I was going to be triggered the entire movie, I was like, okay, let's lean into the thing that makes me most triggered as my favorite scene. And it was either the goat being slaughtered in front of the 6-year-old right there on the streets of Tehran, or I really like when all those women came out with and men came out with AK-47s come out of a car and like stick it right in their face. I was like, nice. This is something. So it's a tie between those two, just being the coup de grace of pure extremist racism that you could possibly show.
They didn't even show any of the food. You know what I mean? Like,
I know, that's so annoying.
And what you can see like doesn't even look like Persian food.
Yeah.
And like the sabzi that they use, like, come on, like you don't.
Yeah, it was a bowl of arugula.
Yeah. You're just like, come on, you're you have all this hospitality within such a rich culture, these amazing foods that are revered globally. And you can't even like show a nice spread of some like sabzi and tadig or kebab or something. Like, how dare you? This is what I'm talking about with
that's
the
an excellent point.
With the nuance. It's like you're really gonna paint this like ancient culture with one brush.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, dude, just hire a fucking Iranian consultant on your racist ass film too. Get somebody to be like, hey, like the food at least. You want to show something? That's an excellent point.
No, consultant's not even enough.
I know, but it's at bare minimum. Sima, you have a favorite scene in this garbage movie?
Oh my god. I hated all of it because like even up until the end, even the people who were helping her escape, even in the cave that she was sleeping in, she was almost sexually assaulted. It just like it literally gave you no reprieve throughout the entire thing. You know, like there's maybe just that one guy who like really like, you know, put her passport and her watch and her stuff away, gave it back to her, and she was like relieved. Even the Swedish woman was a bit of a, you know, biatch.
Yeah.
I can't imagine a world where everyone's a villain or terrible. You know, it's like this movie sucks.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know. I don't have a like particular favorite scene or like
What's your least hated scene?
What's your least hated scene or most hated scene even too? We could just say we could lump in least favorite scene together. What scene angered you the most?
I can tell you mine, and this might help you, Sima.
Yeah.
It's your favorite or least favorite?
My favorite scene in the movie.
Yeah.
Is the opening B-roll of Michigan. It was just such a better time in my life.
Okay.
Was watching just footage of trees and a lake before I knew what I was getting into.
Yeah, it's like, oh, look at this, and then it goes into like the white family and how lovely, what a great time they're having by the lake and like the lemonade. And the only thing he's critical of is how sour the lemonade is.
No, not even that part. To me, it's just the B-roll part. Just it's just the footage of like trees and the lake. As soon as we see that family, I'm like, this movie's insufferable.
Yeah.
Do you guys have least favorite scenes then? If Sima didn't have a favorite scene, what was the one that angered you the most?
I mean, the scene where he's like dragging her out and beating her and the women are watching, like that really triggered.
When they were dragging her out?
In the courtyard.
When she came late to the school and then they didn't even do anything to help her, like that really made me feel crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I would also add anytime Alfred Molina beats Sally Field, because it happens a lot and it looks pretty brutal.
Yeah, it was, and it's like, you know, they do that on purpose. They do that.
Yeah. My least favorite scene was the scene when she finally meets the one Hamid, the guy that's going to help her, and it's the other guy, the other actor, and he's like, the word paradise is a Persian word. Whenever I think about what's happening with this country, I try to think of its gardens. And I was like, no. Do not start trying to appease any Iranians this late in the game. At least have some fucking conviction. You've been a racist movie this entire time. You stick to your convictions. How dare you even try? I was actually annoyed at that point. They're like, Iranian gardens are so beautiful. And the word, I'm like, no. You don't get that right. And I got annoyed.
You know what's funny? Is
Yeah.
that my favorite scene was almost your least favorite scene?
Yeah.
Because, and it had nothing to do with that dialogue. It had to do with the fact that I was like, this is a very nice garden.
Right.
That was like the only positive like opinion I had watching this movie was seeing that scene and being like, wow, this is a really nice courtyard. I would love this garden.
Yeah.
It had nothing to do with dialogue. And then also funny to mention, my least favorite scene is your favorite scene, Kaveh. It's where it's like, they get out of the car. There's like flowers being thrown everywhere. Everyone's doing this weird throat gurgling thing. And then the goat gets its throat slit right there. It's like all of this stuff happens within like 3 seconds of chaos. And I was like, what?
Yeah.
I feel like I don't know if I was wearing my Fitbit. I should go back and look. But I feel like that was definitely the point in the movie where my blood was boiling the most.
Yeah. Damn, That's Poetry, where we discuss our favorite quotes from the film. Do you have a favorite line of dialogue in the movie?
I have one.
Yeah. I have one too. It's just
Iranian women like to wear the chador. It's a mark of respect. You know, when the Shah tried to ban them, they had demonstrations in the streets. Most women wanted to bring it back.
that made me really set the tone for what kind of movie we were in for.
Yeah.
Oh my God, the scene where, it's the second time we're seeing him get up for prayer. And she's like, just stay in bed. We've been here. Just stay in bed. And he throws her hands and is like,
With my family. They're Sayyids. You know what that means? They're direct descendants of Muhammad. They deserve a little respect.
Yeah. They're Saids or whatever he says.
Say it, yeah.
yeah.
Sayed.
You're like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's when he switched up on her
Yeah.
without any like warning.
Yeah. The night before, he's like so gentle and sweet with her, and then it's just like out of nowhere, it switches.
Yeah.
The next time I'm woken up at 5 a.m., I'm going to tell my wife my family's descendants of Muhammad. How dare you talk to me? Because I'm not a morning person, so maybe that's just the response I got to give.
And she's gonna be like, you need to go change some diapers immediately.
Yeah. Like, how dare you? I'm going to slaughter this goat in our living room right now. I'm going to cut his throat.
My favorite quote, it's after Sally Field is like, oh, you promised that we wouldn't be in danger, blah, 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 blah. And then Alfred Molina goes,
America's doing this. Who's supplying the bombs? Who supplies the planes? Who's backing Iraq? Don't be so naive. America's responsible for this war, no one else.
because I'm like, yeah, you're not wrong.
Yeah.
Like, it's really America and Saddam.
Yeah.
But the one thing that I was going through the back of my head when I was watching this, I was like, say Ronald Reagan, you goddamn coward. Say Ronald Reagan.
Yeah.
Like Reagan, George Bush Sr., like these are the guys who are largely to blame for the Iran-Iraq war.
Yeah, but they also armed Iran. Like they armed.
They did. They armed
both
Iran
sides.
They armed
immediately
both
after the
sides.
revolution. Yeah.
They armed both sides, and then you know what?
Yeah.
500,000 people on each side died, and then not too long after they invaded Iraq and killed another million people. So
Yeah. Just a little shout out and history lesson for our listeners that have been critical of the Biden administration and saying, oh, the Republicans would never help Iran, et cetera, et cetera. Immediately after the revolution in Iran, Ronald Reagan supplied the Islamic Republic of Iran with tons of weapons and money. One, specifically to hold the American hostages longer so that Carter lost the election, which means that he promised money and weapons to Iran for them to hold American hostages. And on top of that, afterwards, Iran was sending Hezbollah in to take hostages in Lebanon and in Israel. And Ronald Reagan would send money and weapons and equipment for planes and stuff to Iran in exchange for hostages from Hezbollah, which is the exact same thing that a lot of these Republicans are saying that Biden's doing. I'm not saying he's not doing it. I'm just saying be consistent with your criticism.
I mean, war is profitable, especially when you're killing brown lives, and that is something that I always say. I always let people know that this fundamental regime in Iran is beneficial for the U.S. and they 100% had a hand in keeping them in power. And also overthrew our democracy, but nobody really wants to talk about that.
Yeah.
I was watching War for the Planet of the Apes last night. It's the one with Woody Harrelson's in it. Because I'm preparing to watch the new Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes movie. And at one point I turned to my wife and I was like, these apes and the humans on both sides of this war are treated with more pathos and empathy than any Iranian character now without my daughter. Like the apes were given like more like, here's both sides of the argument. Like they both have a right to believe in whatever. They're scared. Everyone's scared. I was like, the Planet of the Apes characters were treated with more empathy than Iranians.
Yeah, 100%.
That's so funny.
Favorite performance? I gave it to Sheila Rosenthal, the 6-year-old, because there's a scene she cries. I'm like, that's pretty convincing crying for a 6-year-old when she's scared about actually leaving.
Yeah.
There's a close-up on her face. I'm like, okay, cool. We'll give it to classic Iranian actress Sheila Rosenthal.
Yeah.
That's my guess. Is that your favorite performance too?
That was mine.
Yeah, same. I thought that she did a really good job. I thought everybody else was like on 1,000 the entire time.
Yeah.
The sister, especially the Amme, she was yelling and so.
Yeah.
And then it was so unrealistic when she let her go to the market by herself with her daughter. You're like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
since
There's-
when are you not a prison guard? Like,
Yeah.
The weird thing is, I think Sally Field's generally a pretty good actor in most things. And I even prejudice aside, I thought she was pretty bad in this movie. And it's weird that Roger Ebert says she's good. And I mean, maybe warranted that she got the Golden Raspberry for Worst Actress. But she, like, in her moments, she's like, you said we were going to go back home. And I'm like, oh, wow, you're not. This is.
I would blame the director for a lot of
Yeah,
that because
same,
it's
same.
on the director to like tone people back and to be like, oh, you can be at 100 in this scene, but in order for it to hit in this scene, you need to dial it way back in all these other scenes.
when it's at 1,000 and everybody was at 1,000, that is a director's mistake
Mhm.
because
Yeah.
I'm sure he did not ground any of it.
Yeah.
And if you look at his IMDb, he has done nothing of note before or after this movie. I didn't
Yeah.
recognize a single thing he'd done.
It's the
outside
same
of
for
film.
most of the crew. Most of the crew, like the key crew, hadn't really done anything.
Mm.
The composer did some TV stuff and Star Trek,
Okay.
the music composer, and then the cinematographer. No, not the cinematographer. One of the producers produced and associate produced a bunch of James Bond movies. But everybody else involved, like all the other key creatives, did a bunch of nothing.
So nitpicks, hot takes, and what aged poorly. Barn, you got made a good point. I'd written the same point down, was that we pretty much covered a lot of it. Like, this whole podcast episode is a nitpicks, hot takes, and what aged poorly. Everything about this movie aged poorly.
Yeah.
Double feature lineup. If you were showcasing a theater of a double feature lineup and you had to pick this movie and pair it with another movie, what movie would you pick? I can go first. I would pair this with Iran Job.
Yeah.
But the Iran Job is specifically a documentary about Black American basketball player named Kevin Shepard. It's all true events that he couldn't make the NBA, so he went to go play for Shiraz in the Iranian Basketball League. And this camera crew follows him for a year, where he goes from a guy saying, I don't want to go to Iran because they're all camel jockey towel heads, to becoming a guy who falls in love with the country. He falls absolutely in love with the people, the culture, the traditions, and to the point where he ends up returning for future seasons in the, anyways, whatever. I don't want to spoil it, but it's the complete, it's an outsider coming to Iran and having a wonderful experience. And yes, he was a man, so obviously a different experience, but he was a black man in Iran, which comes with its own, like, difficult. Like, he mostly spends a lot of time in the bazaars in Shiraz where they've never even seen a black guy before. And so I highly recommend seeing this documentary, and it'd be great to show Not Without My Daughter at theaters and then follow it immediately with the Iran Job to get, like, here's documentary footage of how Iranians actually treat outsiders and how hospitable they are, and they open their homes to them. So that's my clip, the Iran Job.
I would say, have you guys seen the Persian version?
Not
I haven't
yet.
seen it yet.
It's on our
We'll
list
do
for
it.
the podcast.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so good. I saw it at Sundance last year, and it really gives an insight to the culture. And it's like,
Cool.
and it's like loosely based on, I think, her life, like Mariam Keshavet.
Yeah.
Or what is his name? The famous chef who passed away.
Anthony
Uh,
Bourdain?
Bourdain?
Yeah. Or his episode where he goes to Iran.
Yeah,
Oh,
that's a good
point.
one.
That's a good
Yeah,
one.
very similar vibes to Iran Job. That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think for me, I was struggling to pick one. It just depends on the environment that you're showing it in. Kava, I had the same thought as you. Ultimately, I landed on Iran Job because I was like, this movie isn't really about domestic violence. It's more commentary on culture and showing how Iranians are so different from the US. That's why I was like, ultimately, I would pair it with that. If you wanted to do a screening series where you're commenting on the treatment of Iranian women, of women in Iran, then, or about domestic violence in an Iranian context, there's two that I was thinking of, but I think that the Q&A and the analysis of it would require someone who knows how to really navigate nuanced perspectives.
Oh my God, say the movie. I was like, what is the movie?
That's how you build tension, Kaveh.
I know. I'm just like waiting for you to say what the movie's like.
Anticipation. So, Babe, Pig in a Big City. I'm sure.
Okay.
It's Shada.
Yeah, I thought you were saying Shada.
Yeah. And the other one is A Separation.
Yeah.
I think both of those are really great examples. Separation, which we already did, talks about, it's essentially about this Iranian woman who wants to separate from her husband and take her daughter into the West, right? And then Shada is a domestic violence survival story about an Iranian woman in Australia, and her Iranian husband, is trying to go back to Iran with the daughter.
Right. I just, and one of my critiques of just like what gets made and what gets like critical success and what gets, shown to the world, it's like really exhausting to have to sort of mine our trauma constantly to like,
Yeah.
and this is why I said the Persian version, because it shows the culture in such a beautiful light. Like, and like, I get it. If we're comparing apples to apples, then it's like, yes, the separation, Shada, sure. But that's not what we're like. I feel like that's not what this movie is really about.
Yeah.
But also, that would be that. I mean, that Farron's double feature would be a heavy night of like whinging.
Yeah, that's why I'm saying
4
like
hours
it would have to be, and it would have to be in like a very specific like it's like for a university course, you watch one week, you watch the other one the next week, and you do like a very nuanced like analysis of these films. But also, we now have what? Not Without My Daughter, Shada, Separation. We don't need any more of these ones for a while. There's so many other Iranian stories that we need to tell. Like, stop making these movies for the next 50 years.
I mean, it's just so... they're all so dark and heavy, and it's like, that's not what this culture actually is even about. Like, yes, the last 45 years have been terrible, but there's so much more history to our culture than just, this regime. This is just, in the grand scheme of things, this is just like a blip in time, you know what I mean? And it's unfortunate that our people, like our families and our generation, had to go through it. And I hope that there will be a regime change at some point. There will be liberation of all people, but ultimately it's, let's tell more fun stories. Let's tell, even your film, Toronto, like that is right. That's like a great way to show like the culture and the differences between, families and newcomers versus people who are more Western and all of that. It's like nuance. We want nuance. We don't want to tell tragic tales constantly to be like, but that's unfortunately, that's what it is. It's like the in the Western media platform, they don't, like I was saying before, they don't see me unless I'm like a battered Iranian woman or whatever.
Right. So this is an excellent segue into, can this be a modern, usually we say, can this be a modern Hollywood remake? But for these ones, we change it to, can this be a modern Iranian remake, or adapted to Iranian cinema? We kind of already addressed this, but like, it kind of already is in some ways with the Separation and with Shada, and I don't think we need any more of these. Like, don't touch this for 50 years.
I would do a modern remake of it.
I hate
I'd
you,
make
Colin.
I'd make it about an Iranian woman being forced to live in the U.S. and like put her in Kentucky or put her in Lansing, Michigan. And it's like an Iranian woman who isn't Islamic but loves her country there and loves the history in there, and then marries a white American who moves to Michigan. Yeah, that's what I would do. And
it's like, Ohio, yeah, and I mean,
flip it.
Well, it's so rare that we see the other perspective of, did any of our parents actually want to, like, had the revolution not happened, had we not had all this political chaos, wars upon wars, and all of these things that the West was very much involved in and at fault for, in my opinion, none of us would have left. Immigration ruins a lot of families. It's so hard on people.
Final thoughts and grades. Just to jump in, it's a D-, and it's the lowest grade I've given. I've considered giving this an F or a D-, but I don't know what it would take to be an F. I'd say it's a D-, so it's the lowest grade I've given a movie yet.
I think that this is a dangerous movie, and I think that this movie being out the way it is, at least, actually does more harm than it does good. There's a way to tell her story accurately that I think should have been told, and I think deserves to be told, but this was not it. And this came at the cost of portraying an entire culture in this super, super racist way. And as a result, the Islamic Republic was able to also weaponize this movie to critique the West and defend the way that people are treated. And the other thing that I'll say is this movie kind of feels like, and I mentioned this to Sima, it feels like you're being force-fed a grape, but it's wrapped in poo. Like, the grape is fine, and it's, like, good to have the grape. Like, it's good for you, all this stuff. But, like, why is it wrapped in poo? I don't want to eat the poo. Don't make me eat this. And that's what this movie is. It is a grape wrapped in poo being force-fed to you. And I cannot forgive this movie for that. The only reason I'm not giving this movie an F is because from one end to the other, it is a movie. They made a movie, but I think that society would have been better off without this movie. So I'm giving it the lowest grade I have given a movie, and I'm giving it a D-.
This movie made me appreciate Prince of Persia, by the way, a lot more. Like, I actually like, really had way more respect for Prince of Persia after seeing it.
Yeah, now you know why. Now you know why all of BTS for Prince of Persia was like, we did so much cultural research and we treated Iranians with respect.
Sima.
I also give it a D-. I think from a storytelling perspective and performance and just mere like film critique, it was poorly done. It was poorly acted. And then on top of that, I really, really resent the way that they use domestic violence to make a sort of cultural propaganda film. It to the same point that Fallon made, like, let's tell these domestic violence stories, but let's not use it as a tool to paint this culture with one brush, which is super ignorant and super irresponsible.
So I'm going to play this clip for her. It's just the woman being interviewed when the time the book came out, and just listen to the way they're talking about Iran.
Let's give people an idea of what it's like in Iran. You're telling me about the conditions in the houses. It sounds so filthy that I can't imagine people living that way. In the streets, in their homes, the way they eat.
They're constantly, like, in the interviews for the book, they're like, oh, please tell us about how filthy Iran was and how disgusting the people were. And, like, she did, like, a whole book tour where she shit on Iranians.
Lansing, Michigan, ladies and gentlemen.
All right. Not without integrity. Fuck this movie from its opening credits to the American flag that was proudly in the final scene. There is so much to extrapolate from even the basic fact that there was a deliberate decision to leave out the subtitles. Surely as an audience, we would have benefited by knowing the content of key conversations. Surely it would be interesting to hear the Muslim point of view articulated, whether or not we agree with it. Surely there must have been one person in Iran who does not scream with spite and hostility. Yes, but then the Muslims in this film would be somewhat humanized, and the film is in pains to make them alien ciphers. Racism works by denying a people its specific humanity and turning it into a stereotyped collection of negative attributes. From the moment they land at the airport, Iran is a nightmare of women shrieking at Sally Field and police surrounding her with machine guns because she appears in public in indecent dress. Her husband's relatives flock around in noisy and hostile shouting matches. The visual style of the movie is to portray all the Muslim characters in mostly negative terms. This is not a film, it is a hit job. In its purest and truest form, from its disingenuous, biased, bigoted depiction of everyday Iranians to its hurtful, dangerous, evangelical aim to hurt Iranian-US relations. A soulless movie fueled by hate. This is not a film that hopes to promote understanding between different groups of people, but an uncompromising propaganda film concerned primarily to make its audience hate Muslims. This movie should not be watched, but rather studied as a product of its time. A product made by non-Iranians to stoke the flames of hatred between civilizations. Shot in Israel with American writers and directors, this film does not include Iranians in the creative process. It does not desire to learn its culture, language, ethnicity, history, or lineage. Though trivial attempts are made to humanize a handful of Iranians, those moments are incredibly few and far between the onslaught of one-dimensional villains that parade through this film under the umbrella of Iranian society. Shame on the directors, producers, and all involved for creating a permanent shit smear in the pantheon of Iranian depiction in film.
Shame.
Leaving me to wonder if I'm more insulted as an Iranian or a professional screenwriter. You have neither my forgiveness nor my empathy. For I saw the film for its North Star, its true goal. The film's purpose is to manipulate me to hatred. From the bottom of my heart as an Iranian filmmaker, go fuck yourself. Sincerely, Cinema Rex Podcast. Sima, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Sima.
Thank you so much.
We apologize for putting you through this and
Yeah,
making you
I'm
have to
sorry.
watch this movie.
No. This is fine. Thank you guys so much. I had so much fun, and can't wait till it comes out.
And thank you to our listeners. Farhan, you know how I feel about you. Thank you as always.
Unfortunately.
And to everybody else, be omid didar.
Bye.
Music for Cinema Rex was written and performed by Sohail Sadinejad.